Mamma Mia, Hot Pocket, I'm dynamiting up right now.
Oh! Dude, don't. Oh.
I got this.
Oh my god. I got this.
That was
good to have you join us again, Ben.
One of my favorite things to do and the main focus of this channel is to talk about and review movies. But video games are a nice way for me to kick back and relax and take some stress off from the whole thing. In short, these are the 10 games from this year that I enjoyed the most. As a precursor, I want to mention that if I have not played a game, then it can't be on this list. So, sorry Final Fantasy 15, sorry Last Guardian, I haven't gotten through it yet, so they're gonna have to be omitted from the list. Number 10. Tumblestone. It's a multiplayer game where you have to blast the stones in your sector, and the first player to blast them all wins. But when you blast a stone of a certain color, the next two have to be of the same color, forcing you to choose your shots very carefully or else the whole puzzle resets itself. A very simple but fun scheme that's a recipe for hours of fun. Speaking of recipes, Overcooked is an even simpler premise with even more fun to be had. You and your friends run a restaurant and it all comes down to teamwork to fulfill as many orders as possible. And trust me, it won't take long before the Gordon Ramsay in you comes boiling to the surface. Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth was a game that almost didn't get localized until its community of fans made it happen. And the effort is more than paid off. Everything you could want in a classic turn-based RPG game is present here, including a richly character-based story and solid battle mechanics that are easy to jump into. It's also worth noting that this is the best running game on this entire list. Loading from a battle screen back to the main map takes about a second and a half. Blink and you miss it. It runs incredibly well, very impressive. If only big AAA games ran this well. I'd love to be able to say that Pokemon Moon is a great return to form for the series, but this is a series that hasn't changed its form in 20 years. And as it turns out, this is one of the more innovative entries in the series. The gym system is gone, replaced with a trial system, making you prove your worth before the island leaders will even see fit to do battle with you. A new SOS system where wild Pokemon call for help, creative new Pokemon, redesigns of old classic Pokemon, handling Pokemon daycare personally, 2 new villains in the form of the Ether Foundation and Team Skull, streamlining the minute and tedious bits of the game's mechanics so it all flows better, all while developing a story focusing around the possibility of other dimensions. Pokemon Moon is a new, fresh, proud entry in a long line of fun but monotonous games. Speaking of fun but monotonous, Attack on Titan gave me a whole crock of soup when I only asked for a bowl. When it comes to anime-based video games, developers usually just go down the checklist of what fans want and then consider it done. They're far more suited for making fan service than an actual functioning game, but the team over at Tecmo Koei always put their hearts into their battle portions of their games. And this is no exception. They knew what was important and put extra effort to make sure that it didn't get old for as long as possible. And while your mileage may vary on it, I personally never get tired of killing a Titan and then killing 5 more before the first one falls to the ground. And speaking of Titans falling to the ground, if this were a list of achievements, Titanfall 2 would hands down win my vote for most improved. It was lots of fun making fun of the first Titanfall for its blisteringly stupid approach to an online-only model with no story campaign, but it always stung that such a cool premise and its execution were dragged down with it. And with Titanfall 2, Respawn Entertainment took every bit of major constructive criticism they got from the first game and made real effort to correct that. And I absolutely adore that. How often do you see developers acknowledge their mistakes, actively work to correct them, and actually pull it off? Not only do I appreciate the effort, but I appreciate the final result as well. The story is wonderfully handled and told, the characters are interesting, and the mechanics from the previous game were refined and then built upon for some new fancy fun toys for you to play with. If you ever tried the first one but felt something missing, pick this one up as soon as you can, especially since it came out at the same time as Battlefield, and it would be a shame to see it slip into the dark void, unappreciated and forgotten. No matter what kind of games you like to play, we as human beings seem to love the thrill of a challenge. Something taps into that I dare you attitude from our childhood when you see a high score or an online player at the top of a leaderboard. Darkest Dungeon takes that mantra, grinds it down into a hammer, and beats you to death with it. A looting, turn-based, roguelike RPG steeped in eldritch horror elements, Darkest Dungeon is so tremendously difficult because your characters can turn on themselves. Throughout the course of their quest, things like falling into traps, being ambushed, missing critical shots lowers their morale, and if it falls too far, they snap and become afflicted with a specific status effect that will last the entire quest. Some become selfish and take all your loot for themselves. Others become masochistic and start cutting themselves. And since permadeath is an active mechanic in the game, once a character dies, they're gone. The difficulty challenges all who play it, regardless of previous video game experience, and yet it makes for such a rewarding experience to make it out. If you like a good challenge, be warned, jump into the Darkest Dungeon. Video games have come a long way since they were just sliding blips that everyone called Pong. They can tell stories now, they can challenge us, they can move us in ways that no other art form can. And I always strive for progress, but, you know, sometimes it's nice to just play a fucking video game. And boy, does Doom deliver. A fantastic design from top to bottom, responsive controls, a character that speaks a volume without saying a word, all top out to be one of the most thrilling game experiences in a long time. I haven't had this much of a fun, cathartic experience in a video game since the original God of War. And when it's all set to a score composed by Mick Gordon, what more do I need to sell you on it? Especially with it being as cheap as it is now, this is the first-person shooter game of the year for me. Of all the Legend of Zelda games to come out in all these years, the one that always takes me back to nostalgia is the very first original one for the Nintendo Entertainment System. To date, it's the only Zelda game I've ever beaten. And for someone who was a child that focused primarily on fighting games, a game to come out and hold my attention for that long was nothing short of a miracle. I was sucked in by the unspoken lore, the quiet implication of each new enemy I encountered, and every mystic world I trenched into. So it's no surprise then that Hyper Light Drifter resonated so strongly with me. Unintentionally carrying much of the spark that the original Zelda had, but with its own Dark Souls edge to it, Hyper Light Drifter is one of those games that kinda makes you sound pretentious when you say it's not so much a game as it is an experience. But I'm not quite sure how else to phrase it. If you love a good challenge, this game has my highest recommendation out of all the others on this list. It's fantastic. And the number one spot goes to... I mean, what else could it be? What else but Play Dead's Inside could top the experience over narrative mantra that I just had with Hyper Light Drifter? If you haven't heard of this game before and you're just now hearing about it through my video, you no doubt have noticed that it bears a resemblance to Limbo. And it is by the same studio, but I can confidently say, now that Inside exists, you can take your copy of Limbo and throw it in the fucking trash. There is no reason to play Limbo if you have the means to play Inside. None of the mechanics in Inside overstay their welcome or are too vague for you to not figure out. And just like the mechanics, the game itself doesn't overstay its welcome. It keeps it at just the perfect length. Nothing feels stretched or padded, and there's still some ambiguity as to the overall meaning of the entire game, but this one actually gives you a little bit more discussion material to be had. Inside stands on its own merits, even outside of being compared to Limbo. I don't know what else I could add that everyone else isn't already saying. Just go play Inside. And those were the best games that I played this year. Thank you for watching, stick around. Coming up soon will be a top 10 of the best movies that I saw and the top 10 worst movies that I saw. See you around. This is a joke, right? This isn't real. This is a fake game. If I were a parent and Platinum was my kid and this game was a project they brought home and they were like, Daddy, Daddy, look what I made, I'd put them up for adoption because I would be ashamed that I share bloodlines with someone with so low a standards that they think this is acceptable. Holy shit. shit, did anyone test this thing? If these devs were my kid, I'd leave them in a basket on the front porch of a slaughterhouse.
Star Plus